Boys, a new era of super sport is among us. We've seen the 600 class slowly wane in popularity. Inline fours cannot meet emissions the way that they used to. And now we have kind of a two-tier super sport category if you look at Yamaha's new offerings. For example, you have the parallel twin larger displacement not so super sport category with the R7 designed to hit the lower end of the market. It's a little bit cheaper. And now, of course, we have the R9, which is really meant to be the harbinger and replacement of the R6. And I'm not just saying that to increase the hype or to make you guys upset in the comments. I'm actually saying it because they will be raced in World Supersport, which used to have the R6. So in theory, it is a replacement. So we're going to break down this new generation of Supersport, what it means for riders nowadays, and if I think it's any better than the old 600 category. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the R9. This was a heavily anticipated model, one that we kind of all knew was coming down the pipe. Yamaha had been cross-platforming their MT motorcycles with their R bikes. Now, historically, those MT bikes had more to do with the R bikes than the other way around. You look at the MT10, that was based on an R1 superbike, whereas the R7 and R9 are actually based first and foremost on their MT counterparts. But since the MT bikes are cross-platform with R bikes, we all knew there was a gaping hole in Yamaha's lineup that would be filled by an R9. And this all started with the venerable R6 being phased out of development, with Yamaha citing tightening emissions controls and the fact that there wasn't as much street interest in buying these motorcycles anymore, rendering the motorcycles a track-only variant. The R7 appeared as not exactly a replacement for the R6, but really an entry point and a step up over the R3. And the R7 was the first motorcycle in Yamaha's lineup to utilize this new thought process of taking a naked bike and turning it into a sport bike. And I gotta be honest, I was very skeptical when this motorcycle first came out, but I became a believer. They managed to change the geometry, change the suspension enough, and change the brake master cylinder, most importantly of all, and made a motorcycle that felt pretty damn sporty to ride both on road and on track. However, with the R7 providing a little bit more sporty prowess than the MT-07, it still was a very far cry from what an R6 was, and a lot of enthusiasts called that out and felt that. So when the R9 debuted, I think we all hoped that we'd get a fire-breathing 3-cylinder super sport replacement that had more grunt, more torque, and could be a real race replica. And we kinda got that. Despite the cross-platforming of the CP3 and the MT-09 platform, the R9 actually features a lot of all-new developments. And in truth, it's kind of a new concept. It's not really built from the ground up as a homologated, dedicated racing machine, which, truth be told, is overkill for the streets. I know you guys don't like it when I say that, but it's kind of true. I don't want to ring a bike out to 17,000 RPM when I'm trying to commute to work. The R9 kind of splits the difference in terms of being a road and track motorcycle. It's not really designed as a direct replacement to the R6, but rather a very sporty lineup. If you look at the R3, I would say that motorcycle is 10% track and 90% road. The R7 bumps it up to maybe 25% track and 75% road. I think the R9 is kind of a 50-50, maybe erring on the side of like a 75% track and 25% road, given the ergonomics package does seem a bit more aggressive, but overall it is an agreeable and torquey engine to use on street. And then of course the Yamaha R1 is 90% track and 10% road because that is a homologated superbike designed to go as fast as possible. So I really think that's the play for Yamaha, is to create a sliding scale of accessibility in terms of track day performance versus street performance. The R9 is powered by the same 890cc 3-cylinder engine from the MT-09, albeit with a slightly different state of tune and some different internal gearing to make it rev out a little bit longer and have some longer legs as a real deal sport bike. I think the MT-09 tops out at maybe 140 something miles an hour. I'm pretty sure the R9 will definitely go to at least 160 160 if I were to guess. And while official power figures haven't been released yet, we can expect that this motorcycle will make 117 horsepower and 69 foot-pounds of torque, just like its MT-09 counterpart. Now, the R9 has Yamaha's newest lightweight gravity cast aluminum twin spar frame, which does appear to be quite different than the MT-09, although if you look closely at the bottom end of the frame, it looks surprisingly similar because it is sharing the same engine, and engines and frames do have to go together to some extent. You see a lot of manufacturers cross-platforming engines and frames, like the CP2 and the MT-07 goes in the Tenere, goes in the R7. There are different brackets that manufacturers will put around the frame, but the engine still has to fit with the same similar architecture. So although people online are saying that the R9 has an all-new, brand new frame, I kind of think it's going to feel very similar to the MT-09. Although it does have a different front end than the MT-09, it has 50/50 weight distribution and Brembo stylemic calipers, so a lot of those final edge touch points on the R9 should be a little bit better than the MT-09 as well. Now, ergonomically, the R9 isn't that dissimilar from the R7 in that it's trying to split the difference between street and track. If you look at the rider triangles for an R1 versus an R9, you'll see the R9 is way more relaxed, adding evidence to my thesis that this motorcycle exists on a sliding scale of street to track performance in Yamaha's R-Bike lineup. Now, one way that the R9 is very different than the old generation of super sports is its extensive suite of electronics and other rider aids. The R9 has lean sensitive traction control, a up and down quick shifter, different selectable power modes, and a 6-axis IMU, which makes it technologically way more advanced than the R6 ever hoped to be. That bike had very rudimentary traction control and actually in its last generation featured a dashboard from a 2009 Yamaha R1. Kind of a parts bin update when it was happening in 2017 was when the last R6 came out. We've come a long way since then. The R9 also features cruise control and a 5-inch TFT display. It's pretty sweet. And all of this comes at $12,499, which makes it incredibly value-driven. It functionally costs the same amount of money as the R6 did in its final years, and yet it provides more torque, more electronics, and a newer platform. That's pretty impressive. And it's cheaper than a Gixxer 750 and a Street Triple RS, which I gotta give credit where credit's due. But let's talk about racing and talk about why this really is the new generation of super sport. Because if you haven't been keeping up with what's happening in the super sport category in racing, you may not realize that 600s aren't even what's most competitive anymore. With modern emissions regulations and waning interest in 600s, the new super sport category has an insane hodgepodge of motorcycles currently competing at both the world level and in domestic championships. In days past, the rules used to be very cut and dry. You had 600s with a couple cheater Kawasaki's that were throttle limited, but for the vast majority of bikes, it was a bunch of 600s. And in the 1000 categories, it was just a bunch of 1000cc inline 4s or V4s, and then Ducati, if they were still running their twins, which they did up until 2017, if memory serves me correctly, could plus size a little bit to keep themselves competitive. The rules were modified a little bit when the Daytona 675 was announced and the MV Agusta F3 675. They were 3 cylinders, so they were allowed to bump up the displacement a little bit, although my heart is a little bit sad they were never that competitive while being fantastic to ride though. The rules used to dictate that 4-cylinder motorcycles were limited to 600 cc's, 3 cylinders are limited to 800 cc's, and twin cylinders are limited to 955 cc's, which was the Panigale V2 uses. But now with the new generation rules, there's a lot more other bikes that are allowed to compete, including this new Yamaha 890cc triple, which has been allowed to compete in the category. The World Supersport Grid is going to have the most dynamic and interesting category of racing probably in the entire world. You're going to have 3 cylinders, twins, 4 cylinders, old school R6s, ZX6s, MV Agustas, Triumphs. I mean, there's a lot of bikes on that grid right now. But it's interesting because only a few end up being extremely competitive. We're going to talk a little bit about those. Heck, even the Gixxer 750 was allowed to compete with a throttle lock system. You saw Ty Scott in the Moto America Championship in Supersport doing very well with that package. And so it really is just a giant hodgepodge. And heck, even Chinese motorcycle manufacturer QJ is going to pioneer an 800cc 4-cylinder on the grid. It's crazy times we live in. But if you've been paying attention in World Supersport, you would know that the R6 is still one of the most competitive motorcycles on the grid. Stefano Manzi does amazing things with that motorcycle, and yet the V2s are typically the bikes at the bleeding edge of the pack. They just have more torque. And they're Ducatis. Ducatis are just insanely dominant right now. What can we say?
You know how much we love Rockform phone cases and handlebar mounts around here, but did you know they have an entire lineup of products that can further take advantage of your existing case? Your Rockform phone case is literally the key that unlocks a whole ecosystem of other products aimed to make your life way easier. Rockform's cases have notoriously strong magnets, like really strong. So strong that if my phone is in my pocket, it will sometimes pull my kitchen cabinet doors open if I stand too close to the handles. That's literally happened. To further take advantage of the world's most magnetic case, you could get yourself the magnetic power bank. The power bank is so strong you can attach it to your phone and set it in your motorcycle tail bag or backpack and not have to worry about them losing contact and missing out on valuable charge time, which is a huge game changer for motorcyclists on the go. You can also take advantage of their car accessories like the wireless magnetic car vent mount that keeps your phone magnetically mounted to your car's air vent while it's charging up wirelessly. If you're a motorcyclist, skip the cheap accessories and get the best of the best that's going to stand the test of time with Rockform. They've been a long-time supporter of the channel for over 4 years now, and I truly stand by their brand and their products. I've used them daily all the time. If you want in on the Rockform action, click the link in the description and use the code YN25 to get 25% off your order. That's YN25 for 25% off of your order. Thank you to Rockform for supporting today's video. Now let's get back into it.
But one motorcycle does not make an entire new category, but Yamaha is kind of leading the way. And if we look at the KTM RCR 990, we might be seeing the first of 2 of these new generation supersport motorcycles. Now, you may not know this because KTM competes in MotoGP and creates literal prototype aerodynamically advantaged crazy ride height device motorcycles to race at the highest levels of two-wheeled racing, but they actually have not sold a street-going sport bike for a really long time. KTM dropped sales of their incredible RC8R back in 2015, so it's been 10 years since KTM has made a real fully fared sport bike, not including the RC390. We're talking big boy bikes here. And the RCR 990 is very different than the RC8R that came before it. The RC8R was a V-twin superbike similar to Buell's EBR or the old Ducati Panigales that came with the massive twin-cylinder engines. But this one had an 1175cc V-twin that made 173 horsepower and 90 foot-pounds of torque. I've actually had the chance to ride an RC8R around Road Atlanta. It's a phenomenal motorcycle, so KTM can build some pretty sweet sport bikes when they want to. Also, fun fact, the only reason that KTM didn't build sport bikes for the last 10 years is because they felt that it was irresponsible to do so. And yet they're selling Super Dukes with damn near 180 horsepower. Don't ask me. But unlike modern superbikes, the RC8R had virtually zero rider aids or traction control or even ABS, making it a real beast to ride. It was an analog monster of a motorcycle. KTM also sold the highly limited RC8C, which was a totally different concept, also a motorcycle I got to take on track, and is kind of infamously my favorite track bike of all time. It's a real deal race bike. It is incredible, but it costs like $40,000 and they make 100 of them every like 3 years or something like that. So it's pretty hard to get one. So the RCR 990 was kind of created to fit this new exciting landscape of not so super sport motorcycles, but really, in my opinion, the new generation of proper supersport bikes. KTM is also putting this motorcycle as a wild card in World Supersport in 2025 to gather some data and to prove that they are really ready to race, even though it can't really score points because it doesn't fit into the rule set currently. But again, to remind you how insane this is, we have a 990cc parallel twin fighting against a 600cc inline 4, and yet that 600cc inline 4 is still wildly competitive against the 990. I don't know, it's a crazy time. And of course, speaking of all of this, Ducati did announce that they made a final edition of the Panigale V2, implying that it would either be heavily changed or revised, or perhaps axed altogether. I personally think, based on just heritage and history alone, there's very little evidence to suggest that Ducati is not going to make a twin-cylinder sport bike. It just seems impossible. It's what the brand has been built on. If they only make a V4 Panigale and everything else is just like twin-cylinder, not-so-super sport bikes, is that really Ducati? But I understand from the consumer perspective that it is kind of confusing to see a Panigale V2 that makes damn near 160 horsepower, sounds like a super bike to me, next to a fire-breathing 220 horsepower brand new Panigale V4S. We've really started to bleed the edge of performance here. I'm personally a really big fan of the Super Quattro engine in the Panigale V2. It's genuinely a gem, and it's very fun to ride, and it just feels class Ducati and just like a real true blue sport bike. So it'd be interesting to see if they're going to update that model or if they're going to come out with a different version of their V2 machine to compete in the new generation super sport category. But for now, the R9 really stands to benefit from the on-road performance that it's going to have, the value-driven proposition, and potentially race-winning pedigree as well. It's going to be really interesting to see next year if that bike is competitive, and if it is, man, that's going to be some good advertising for the motorcycle. We might see an entirely new generation of squids pine for an R9 versus the R6 like they used to, but what's funny is I think that a lot of these street squids that pine for the R6 don't really do so because of race results. They do it because their buddy had an R6, maybe because of Valentino Rossi, and definitely because it revs to 16,000 RPM. That's a big deal. The R9 only revs to about 10.5, and while it does make accessible torque, that makes it a pretty different motorcycle than the crazy revs of an R6. Unless you're looking at a Kawasaki ZX4RR, finding those kind of revs in a street-going motorcycle is basically impossible nowadays. But honestly, in this new world where anything goes in the new generation super sports, and we have a variety of motorcycles, we have 3-cylinders, V-twins, parallel twins, inline 4s, Chinese 800cc 4-cylinders, that's really what we need to keep people excited. Because as much as the fast boys and the comment sections love to bemoan the death of the R6 and the ZX6, and they say that they're gonna ride them till they die, even though they just started riding last year and they're like 23 years old, I really think that this is a fantastic move for the sport and will definitely keep pushing the envelope. I love seeing variety in motorcycling. It's one of my favorite reasons to be a motorcyclist. The fact that we have so many different bikes that we can choose from makes a big difference. You know, the car enthusiast market has become incredibly boring in the last 10 years. Basically, you can just buy a Miata and that's it. Versus motorcycling, not only do we have plenty of options to choose from, you have different engine configurations. They all sound incredible. They're all super fun to ride. And so if you're sitting in the comments just getting mad about the fact that 600s aren't what they used to be, I think you need to get with the times and get excited about this new generation super sport, because I'm just glad it exists. And again, even if these bikes can't rev to 17,000 RPM, that does not mean they're bad. And honestly, I think I'd rather take an R9 than an R6. Just sounds more fun to ride. What do you guys think about this new generation of super sports? Do you think we're on the cusp of a brand new explosion of cool motorcycles that in the sport category fully fared that people can enjoy on track and on road in equal measure? Or are you one of those aforementioned 600 squids that just hates everything that comes out that isn't your R6? Let me know down below in the comments. Thanks so much for checking out today's video. I truly do appreciate it. We'll catch you in the next one. See you later.
Oh, I love being here inside of the warm embryonic fluid of Valentino Rossi. Me and him just sharing foods together. Maybe he's gonna eat some pizza or some pasta here in the hills of Tavullia. But you know where else it's nice and warm and cozy is this next episode of Yami Noob. You can click on right over here. I'd love for you to watch it. But anyways, I'm gonna stay here hanging out. Me and him might go onto the track later, but I'll catch you guys later.